Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining and being with us here today. My name is Lucy Machocho, for those of you who are not in the call when I started earlier. So my name is Lucy Machocho. I'm a pharmacist by training and a technical programs assistant here at African Pharmaceutical Network. A big thank you to everyone for joining and making the time to be here. And I will go through some housekeeping calls before we get into the session, just to make sure that we have a smooth and productive session. So one, please keep your microphones muted when you speak, to try and minimize any background noise and interruptions during the presentation. And if you have any technical issues, then please use the chat to reach out to us, and we'll be able to support. For any questions and answers, please reserve this to the end of the session, because according to the program, we have the presentation first and then the Q&A at the end of the session. But during the presentation, if you feel like you have any burning issues, then feel free to raise them in the chat box and we'll be able to address them during the Q&A session. And as for the Q&A session, when it comes to that particular session, please just raise your hand and we will be able to unmute you to raise your question. And the session will also be recorded and will be shared to you after the end of this session. And with that, I will welcome my colleague, Dr. David Odhiambo, to give us a brief introduction about what African Pharmaceutical Network does and why we are all here. Yeah. David. Hello. David, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Lucy.
I was speaking before. Was my microphone muted, or you could hear me before as well?
No, it's now that I've started hearing you, unless it's only my end.
Oh, I was speaking before. Okay. I had called, or can someone else confirm if they could hear me, or was it just David, so that I can go through the housekeeping call rules again?
Yes, we could hear you.
All right. So David, could be a technical issue on your end, but you will now have the floor to give us the introduction to African Pharmaceutical Network. Haribu.
Thank you, Lucy. So as we get started, maybe I would ask of Juliet to bring up the screen. Greetings, everyone. I hope you all well. So Odhiambo David is my name. I'm part of the leading team within African Pharmaceutical Network. And it's an honor for us today to have this session on health technologies assessment. And I'll just take the first not more than 5 minutes to give you an overview of what African Pharmaceutical Network is, what possibilities we are looking at, and how we can engage moving forward, and our mission and the mission behind the work that we do. So if we go to the second slide, African Pharmaceutical Network basically is a Pan-African network that we established in 2020. And the aim of our coming together was based on the realization that we needed a consortium, a platform that could drive engagement within the African pharmaceutical landscape. One, to promote knowledge sharing, to shape policies, because we're in an environment that is highly regulated, but therefore then it means we need to actively engage to ensure that the policies are responsive to the market demands, but also as much as they're responsive to the market demands, they are in tune with the needs of the local context and the local market as it should be. Ultimately, the last bit is understanding that we are working in a business ecosystem, and therefore we need to nurture innovative partnerships that will support business ecosystem to be as reliable as possible, and with an aim of ensuring there's reliable access to safe, effective and affordable quality medicines and healthcare products within the African continent for the African people. And that was the mission behind us coming up with African Pharmaceutical Network in 2020. And that was on the backdrop of COVID-19. Next slide. So guided by that, some of the key challenges and some of the key pain points that we saw, why did we need to come up with this? As a continent, we had the African pharmaceutical industry, which all through from the year 2005, when the pharmaceutical manufacturing plan for Africa was conceptualized, was that we had limited local manufacturing with over 90% of products being imported. The narrative has not changed as much, and the statistics are still pointing towards that, with an average of 70 to 90% of countries of imports of pharmaceuticals in the continent still at that level, which means there's need to stimulate the local industry to ensure that there's growth in terms of local production, but not only production in terms of quantity, but also ensuring that the production that is happening is for quality products that are necessary and that is they are needed in the market and needed in the continent. So that limited local pharmaceutical manufacturing was a key need, and therefore we needed to look at how do we drive that. The segregated continental industry where you have different players and different ecosystem players working in silos. Somebody working in a hospital facility will only engage with the pharmaceutical industry at a point of maybe it's a medical representative engaging with them and telling them about the products that they do have. But then the question is, if I tell you about a product that you would want to have, and there's no available financing mechanism behind that product, for example, the insurance is not covering for that product, maybe your patients are dependent on medical insurance. And if that does not exist, they will not take up that product and that solution in the market, which means then that will be a lost opportunity. So then there's need for us to have these engagements where we're looking at a system-wide approach with stakeholders to ensure that other than working in silos, we're able to work collaboratively in an ecosystem where we understand what contribution of each of the players within the ecosystem are and how we can engage to make the environment be more conducive and enabling for all the players to operate. And finally, there was not such platform that exists at that moment. And therefore, we felt like it is important that we establish a platform and make it be a sustainable platform that could bring together stakeholders from industry to the professionals to facilities and government entities and development partners who are working in the continent, so that we have a single consortium where we can bring stakeholders together and shape a future that works to shape the trajectory of investment and how that would work. And that was also guided by the fact that as much as we had COVID-19 at the moment, that was in the 2020 period, not much leadership was coming from the industry and from the pharmaceutical players or the healthcare industry players. Rather, we left most of the work to be led by the global development partners and supporters, but also to the political leaders who are driving the agenda. The question is, how do we make it sustainable if the people who are impacted, who are actually involved on a day-to-day operation and oversight of healthcare delivery were not part of the conversation? And that was a key priority and a key need that we saw at that particular moment. So what was the aim of this intervention? If we're able to do the work, the next slide, we're able to do this work in a structured way, we would want to ensure that there's continental knowledge sharing is fostered, and therefore I would be able to learn from professionals and experts in different domains, whatever it is. And when you're sharing knowledge, you are stimulating new thoughts, new ideas, and therefore able to drive the conversation to a new frontier that we aspire for. And the same aspect of knowledge sharing is then to promote best practices. And one of those conversations, as much as we're going to talk about health technologies assessment, when you realize that is a practice that can actually ensure that we get better quality products accessible in our continent to the patients who need them, that is a best practice that most of us in this call for now we're seeing. We look at 40-something people who have already signed in. That means these best practices can be adopted in our facilities, in our regions, in our counties, if you're from the country, Kenya, or even in our countries at a national level. If that happens, those best practices guarantee that our mission of ensuring patients have access to reliable, safe, effective, quality products is made a reality. And also to ensure that we're championing for responsive market-driven policies and regulatory frameworks. As I already mentioned, we are in a regulatory system, but the policies will never set stage for innovation. People need to innovate, but as they're innovating, they also have to ensure that they're safeguarding public health interest, and the policies are not killing innovation, but rather supportive to innovation, while also safeguarding the rights of consumers. And ultimately, all these works in an enabled business environment. Therefore, we need to stimulate investments because there's no business without investments in the ecosystem. And those are key priorities around how we looked at. If we're able to achieve these 4 aims, then we're able to have an ecosystem and a pharmaceutical industry that is meeting the objectives and the mission that we have. So what do we do? What are the priorities that we have as an organization? And in coming up with the priorities, which is the next slide, we noted that there are key strengths that we had, but also those strengths were based on the fact that we also had allies and stakeholders within the ecosystem who would work with us. So because we have professionals as a network, pharmaceutical workforce development became our first priority. There's never going to be development in the sector unless we have competent professionals meaningfully and actively engaged to deliver the services that we hope for, and therefore pharmaceutical workforce development. And on that note, we even have courses that we are offering, that we are training, and these courses are trained by practicing professionals in the different domains and areas of expertise. And in that case, then it means whoever is learning is getting practical insights and knowledge to be able to practice, to be able to transform practice in their domain, which is an aspirational. And when I talk about the business ecosystem support, is looking and knowing that the stakeholders and the businesses within the ecosystem will rely on support in terms of market intelligence. We need regulatory support, technical hand holding, whatever it is that is needed. And for us to make that happen, then we need to collaboratively engage. And that is where now, how do we leverage on our network of professionals to be able to offer that kind of support where it's necessary, and even to drive access programs where those are available or those are feasible, depending on needs in the local market as necessary. And those are some of the key areas that we're looking at. And ultimately on the policy side is looking at what key global policy priorities are there, national or continental policies are there. How do we advocate for better policies, but also how do we see the new imperatives for policy change where there is need for such kind of policy change? And some of the work that we're doing, we'll be looking at it as we move to the next slide. So those are the key priorities that we have as an organization. And how we deliver on these is one, industry discussion forums, which is one of them, the session that we're having now, training and experiential learning opportunities, policy advocacy and environment shaping, and finally, market intelligence and technical support, which falls within the business ecosystem support services. In terms of the team that we work with, we have an advisory board constituted of three. There's McDonald Nose, who is a board member, Kirtin Asai, board member, and John Paul Omolo, who is the chair of the board. Then we have our secretariat constituted of Lucy and Juliet, and we have the leadership team, myself, Kelvin, Esther, Denish, and Anushi Patel. And the main aim is to ensure that we have a team that can help us deliver on the mission, and we're able to ensure that we are delivering on the value that we hope for. The next slide, in terms of partners that we have FIP, IFPMA, A3D Foundation. Those are the partners that we have currently. And the partners enable us, one, to get insights from a global perspective, to help us deliver interventions in the local context, but also to shape new frontiers and to help us in terms of driving the priorities on where we hope to go as an organization, but also for the continent and the industry at large. In terms of geographical footprint, we have presence in the blue-colored countries. Most of them might be individuals that are in those countries who are supporting as well. There is a need for a project, but you're looking at building on that footprint and growing it to cover all the regions that are in gray to be blue by the end of the year, latest in the next 2-3 years. That is our target. And if you're able to do that, then it means the presence and the impact of the work we're doing will be scaling through the other regions where we expect that to happen. Next slide. So in terms of the offering, I'll only cover the first one, which is around the workforce development. And when you talk about the workforce development, is some of the trainings. And I've already mentioned one of the training areas that we're looking at has been regulatory affairs. We have pharmacovigilance and patient safety, quality assurance, supply chain. So currently the ones that are running are three: regulatory affairs, pharmacovigilance, and the pharmaceutical supply chain management. Those are the other programs are yet to be rolled out. And we also facilitate industry discussion forums, workshops where necessary, and also offer skill-based training and development depending on the stakeholders who need such kind of services. And on that note, the next slide is about some of the programs that are already in place, and I've already mentioned that. The RA training, which is already ongoing, pharmacovigilance and patient safety, and pharmaceutical supply chain management, which is relevant to the conversation that we are having now, which I'll be glad to hand over to Lucy so that we get into the conversation for you to understand where does health technologies assessment come into ensuring that the pharmaceutical supply chain management is optimized to ensure that patients get the right product, delivering on the right interventions, and ultimately they're able to derive positive health benefits where and when they are engaging with the industry. And on that note, I'll move it back over to you, Lucy.
Thank you, David, for that overview. I'll just move on to introducing the speaker for the day. And our speaker today is, maybe Juliet, you could help in sharing that as well. Our speaker today is Dr. Anthony Kamau Njuguna, who is a distinguished professional in the fields of hospital pharmacy, cost-effective pharmaceutical provision in insurance services, health technology assessment, pharmaceutical procurement, and evidence-based pharmacotherapy. He holds an MSc in health technology assessment, pricing, and reimbursement from the University of Sheffield, and an MSc in evidence-based pharmacotherapy from Aston University in the UK. He also holds a postgraduate diploma in global health procurement and supply chain from Kent University in the USA. His work experience is over 2 decades in various capacities, including private and public sectors, entrepreneurship, and consulting. His current role is the Chief Pharmacist at Department of Pharmacy at Kenyatta University Teaching Referral and Research Hospital, where he has been instrumental in, among other things, providing leadership in creating a robust formulary system for the hospital, engaging with partners to leverage AI and machine learning in quantification of medicines for the hospital, and also coordinates the hospital's journal club. His expertise he's made several presentations at local and international conferences, including the International Health Technology Assessment Conference and the Pharmaceutical Society of Kenya Annual Scientific Conference. He's a reviewer of the Health Technology Assessment Conference's abstract submission and is a steering team member of the Developing Countries Interest Group under the Health Technology Assessment the international body which focuses on promoting HTA around the world. He was a reviewer, contributor to health technology assessment report for use in low and middle income countries for decision-making in health policy resource allocation. And there's a link to that. Maybe you can I will share it in the group so that you can visit that. And Dr. Kamau is also looking to make a significant impact in HTA and pharmaceutical policy to significantly impact healthcare delivery and resource allocation in low and middle income countries in the era of burgeoning universal health coverage mechanisms being put in place in these countries. Dr. Kamau, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good evening or good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, great. Let me share my slides and good evening, everyone, once again. Is that visible?
Yes.
Let me put it on slide mode, slide sharing. Great. My name's Dr. Anthony Kamau. I'm a Kenyan. I live in Kenya. That's in East Africa. For those of you who do not come from our country, I'm a pharmacist by training. I've also had an interest in HTA and procurement. And a little bit about where this interest started from. Started about when I graduated, just before I graduated, I did a project on pharmacology, and I was looking more specifically at antihypertensive medications. And one of the things that struck me, even as I looked at the guidelines for management of high blood pressure or hypertension, was that the medicines that I was studying, and I was using the hospital, the only referral hospital then, which was Kenyatta National Hospital, as my research site, was that I realized when I looked at the guidelines recommended globally and what was the patients were being treated for essential hypertension was very different. Some were correct, some were not. So I began to ask myself, what would be the impact, or what's the impact of using a second or third line medication for the same condition for different patients? And so that even though that was beyond the scope of my study then, I realized there could be, and it became an area of curiosity and an area of interest. And that's what led me to do the first master's in evidence-based pharmacotherapy, because I wanted to make a contribution in that area to ensure that whatever medicines are prescribed based on existing evidence, so that the best outcomes can be afforded for individual patients, but also for the entire healthcare system. And that is how I got into this area of HTA. So starting off with, and just looking what are the challenges that we are talking about? Why are we bringing up HTA? And I believe David has really done a good job in terms of laying a foundation for some of the things we're going to talk about. Of course, we know that the continent we live in is a large continent. It's a beautiful continent. It's full of beautiful, wonderful people. But we have our challenges, some of them in the health system, and that's what we'll be focusing on today because we're health providers. And in that space, we know that we have challenges in terms of managing our health resources. We don't optimally manage our health resources. Whatever little we have, we don't have much in terms of health resources. It's growing, but we don't manage that very well. We may not distribute that accordingly based on the health needs that we have. So some areas may get disproportionately more than they deserve. We have insufficient budget allocations. I think the Abuja Declaration had declared that we should spend 15% of our budgets on healthcare. I think only one nation in Africa is doing that. So very inadequate budget allocations, and we've seen the impact of that. We've seen machines that are not cannot be repaired because the spare parts are too expensive. So that service is not provided if it's an MRI and so on. We have weak supply chain systems, and by that I mean the policy and legal framework may not be strong in most countries. The insufficient staff or insufficient technical capacity of the people that work in those systems. There could be issues of corruption that make sure that even if the policy is there, then the whole thing doesn't work. And finally, healthcare resource allocation decisions are also very complex. And again, sometimes we lack the technical expertise. And one of those areas is in HTA. Now, going on with the challenges is the growing health services. We know that the populations are growing. When we got independence as a country, we were probably about less than 10 million or thereabout. Now we are looking at 50 million. Now, of course, that will mean that health services have to expand to meet the needs of these people. So that's the background against which we are working, against all the challenges that we have. We have also seen the growth of non-communicable diseases. In fact, I understand the WHO has only had 2 emergency meetings, and the first one was for HIV, the second one was for non-communicable diseases in sub-Saharan Africa. So basically what we're saying is that non-communicable diseases, that's your diabetes, your hypertension, your cancers, your chronic pulmonary diseases, obstructive pulmonary diseases, those 4 conditions are really growing at an epidemic level. That's causing the need to address them urgently. And then we have also the new emerging diseases. So you can imagine this pot of challenges, and then you're just cramming it with all these additional things that it may not be able to hold. That sort of describes the current challenges that we are facing. How do you make decisions in the midst of all this? When you look at the literature, when I look at the literature, and even based on our experiences, we may have an idea, especially if you work in the higher echelons like the Ministry of Health, the decision-making bodies, you probably have a clue that procedure. And then there's lack of transparency. How did you make a decision to procure the MRI and not do something else like rehabilitate the theater that is run down, or provide maternity services? How did we decide this and not the other? That transparent process, can you take us to a site or a document that is online that shows us how that decision was arrived at using very transparent mechanisms? I've asked all of us in the audience. I'm not sure whether we could actually, maybe one or two, a few here and there, but I don't think for majority of us, we could actually go to a place and get a transparent decision that was made concerning why an investment was made in certain equipment or use of healthcare resources in a certain direction. There's limited history of engagement of relevant stakeholders throughout the priority setting process. And here we'll be saying that the priority setting process involves a lot of stakeholders. It involves the pharmaceutical industry. It involves the clinicians and the societies where they come from, or the associations where they come from. The patients are also stakeholders. I'm not sure we see a lot of patient engagement in processes that involve them. But so again, there's limited history of that. Limited capacity to effectively allocate available resources. As I said, HTA processes are one of those processes that are effectively used to effectively allocate. So there's limited capacity. The expertise in this area is growing. We've seen a lot of training in health economics, and a lot of health economists are coming up and helping meet this need. Part of health economics training is really HTA, so that capacity is really helping. Limited capacity to monitor and evaluate current use of available resources used in the healthcare, again, related to that. Yeah, we are in a setup where we have donor-driven decisions as well, and we sometimes don't have as much say as we would want, because whoever pays the piper calls the tune. Other issues of fiscal discipline that we are all aware of. So what might be the solution? And I've alluded to that even as I have brought out some of these issues. And this, one of the ways is to set priorities in an explicit manner. Explicit means it's out there in the open. You can see it. It's available for everyone to scrutinize and to ask questions and to critique if that needs to happen. Or somebody in the pharma industry may say, why was my drug not allowed to be in the formulary or the essential medicine list? So why is it, even though it is there, why is it not being reimbursed or paid for by the national insurance body, whoever that may be? So that explicit manner in which everything is out there in the open can only be availed, of course, when you use things like HTA, and we'll go into what HTA is all about. So explicit manner would look at issues of, are we looking at things, diseases of highest prevalence? Is that where our focus is? What would be the best outcome for the little resources we have? In other words, what's the biggest bang for the buck? So if I have $1 and the kind of noise or bang it will produce if I put it in this area is bigger than this area, then I should put it in the area that gives me the biggest bang or the biggest sound or the biggest or best outcomes. Then we need to evaluate the anticipated costs and quality of healthcare that will come out of that resource option or resource utilization. So if I opt to invest in pediatrics or maternal healthcare, maternal and child health, then I should, as compared to older people, geriatrics, I should be able to look at the costs of investing in each and the quality of healthcare that will come out of that investment. And whatever gives me the best outcomes or the most health, so to speak, would really be what we should be investing in, because we have limited, again, resources. We should also consider other explicit considerations that might be affected by the decisions that we make. So, of course, it's not just looking at costs and quality, issues of ethics, equity, and so on. Of course, looking at this in a transparent manner, as I had said, involving manufacturers, supply agencies, policymakers, private sector, patients, and so on. So what's the definition of HTA? So HTA is a multidisciplinary process. It will not be one person sitting down to evaluate whether a drug should be in the formulary or whether it should be in the national essential medical list. It will be different stakeholders evaluating that. So, and it could also involve even universities that have the technical expertise in some of the more complex aspects, especially when you're looking at multiple drugs for one condition. You may not have that technical expertise. And you find that in the West, quite a number of these, the government usually contracts some of the universities with the technical academic expertise to do some of these technical evaluations and then bring them back for the decision-making body to consider the evidence that has been produced. So HTA is not only about drugs. You could talk about medical devices. You could talk about diagnostic tests. You could talk about a medical procedure, surgery. For example, should we do a laparoscopy with minimal invasion as opposed to an open heart surgery, for example? All those things can be evaluated, and you can do the costs and benefits or the cost and outcomes of each and determine which is the best alternative for the resources that you have. And this is done at different points in the life cycle of any of these. So a drug could be the only drug in this, as we are talking today. Maybe it's a new drug, but over time other drugs come. So maybe it's very high in terms of utilization, but it begins to go down as generic alternatives, patents expire. So we consider all that process, the whole life cycle of any of these drugs, devices, and so on, and look and keep doing the health technology assessments, evaluating the costs and the benefits as we go along. So the purpose of HTA is really to inform decision making. So once you accumulate the costs and the benefits, and then you're able to put them together and come up with a costs benefit or a cost effectiveness analysis as a ratio, and seeing whether that makes sense to you, to your country, at whatever point in your development. So basically what we're saying is that this process promotes efficiency, equitability, and high quality healthcare. It's also a transparent process, and I believe that's what makes it also very good. There's a global move to advance this practice of HTA. Of course, in the more advanced economies, this is very well enumerated, but we find in our setup, this is something that is just growing. So UHC, as part of UHC, UHC is, you all know, is universal health coverage. And UHC has become, sorry, let me just adjust something here. Mm-hmm. Can you still see my presentation?
Yes, you can.
I seem to have lost it. Okay, let me share again. All right. Great. So UHC has become one of the ultimate goals of sustainable development goals. We know about the SDGs that were created by the United Nations. And so at a big level, global level, SDGs is what we are focusing on. by a certain year in the future. And one of the things that we want to ensure that we in health especially is that every country should boast or should have universal health coverage. And universal health coverage, in simple terms, is really trying to protect people from financial catastrophe. Yesterday, I was called because I'm not at home, and I was told my house help needed medication, which was going to cost about $30. And the reason for that is because by the time we pay her, by the time it's mid-month, most likely she has used up all the resources that she has. So if she had a cover, then that would not be a problem. So a lot of these are the challenges that we face, and is a good thing for us to develop universal health coverage. And HTA is a key component in ensuring that the use of resources, the choice of resources for universal health coverage then are used optimally, are selected optimally, so that then we can get the essential quality health services that we need. So these are some of the potential areas of HTA application. I got these from WHO document, and I'll not go through it in detail. I just want you to look at the third bullet on the left. That's priority setting. So HTA is really a priority setting paradigm. It's really a way of setting priorities in a way that is evidence-based, in a way that is transparent, in a way that tells us what the costs and the outcomes of whatever it is that we choose to do are, and we compare that with other interventions, and we decide then this is the best intervention for the resources that we have. If we do that, then we optimize the healthcare or the interventions that we provide in a country, in a hospital, and so on. So the third bullet says, identify best buy interventions in essential medicines list, health benefit package design, and public health. So that is what HTA does for purpose of this presentation. That's in priority setting, we identify the best buy interventions. The second, the middle part is purchasing. So once you've identified what the best buy is, then you purchase, you just buy it. I mean, you've made a good decision, go ahead, because you know that the little money that you have when you buy it and you use it properly, then you get the best bang for the money that you have just spent. So you procure the vaccines or the drugs or devices, including price negotiations and special access schemes, which we will talk about in more detail. And then the last bit, and I want you to look at the second bullet only, is that you could think of quality improvement. HTA can help you in quality improvement. Once you've bought the drug, for example, then you can have schemes where you pay for performance. That means that you have what we call results-based financing using quality indicators. For a drug, for example, if it's a new drug and you don't have enough evidence in the market, so yes, you may have done a clinical trial, it shows some benefits of existing treatments, but it's more expensive, significantly more expensive than what we are using. So a country or HTA will help us say, okay, go ahead. We say to be reimbursed by the medical or the national health scheme, but we'll only pay for performance. For the performance that you said it will have, that's what we will pay for. And this can be done for other health services, including the supply chain, as we shall see. So some of the areas you could use HTA in universal health coverage and reimbursement systems. Reimbursement system is just an English word, a big English word. It just says reimburse, give back. If somebody, so think of insurance. If I go and get a service, I'm treated in a hospital, the hospital generates an invoice. So I don't pay cash because I have a policy. In this case, I've maybe paid some insurance policy. I don't pay cash when I go to the hospital to receive the cash. I mean, to receive the service. I get the service, the hospital invoices the insurer, and then the insurer reimburses the hospital. So that's what reimbursement really is all about. It involves a situation where there is somebody who is insured for against an event, where that could be a sickness or an accident. So when that illness or an accident happen, then the insurer reimburses the provider of the service. So if you took your car to a garage after an accident, the insurer will reimburse or pay for the repair of your car to the garage. So when you think about this, now think about the national, this blow it up 1,000 times. So instead of an individual insurer or a private sector insurer, think of a national insurer. And that's what most of our governments try to do when they think of a universal health coverage. They try to create a national insurance. So how people pay premiums is really dependent. Like in the UK, it's the government that sort of pays for this premium. But in some of our countries, it's a mixed. It could be a mixed picture where individuals pay, but also the government through taxes also pays the insurer. So HTA can be used then to include new medicines, as I've indicated, into a reimbursement scheme. So here HTA is used to decide whether this medicine should be in the scheme. So you could have the national essential medicines list with 1,000 products, but you only decide, because we don't have a lot of resources, we will prioritize reimbursing disease drugs only for infectious diseases and chronic diseases, the 4 chronic diseases that I've talked about, hypertension, diabetes. And then you could decide we can only reimburse up to a certain level. So if it's a medicine for a prescription for high blood pressure, we can only give reimburse $30, for example. So anything above that, so there are different sort of arrangements. This is just trying to explain what the reimbursement scheme. HTA can also be used to roll out broad public health programs like immunization or screening for cancer. So again, here we look at the cost effectiveness or cost utility outcomes, and then we compare immunization, screening for cancer. If they all created a ratio of cost effectiveness, and we ranked them based on their increasing or decreasing cost effectiveness, then we're able to take the one with the highest return for the money. So that's how HTA can be used to make decisions about which public health programs to invest in. And then we could identify interventions that create the greatest health gain and offer the most value related to second. Then setting prices for medicines and other technologies based on the cost effectiveness, and we will see more on that. But yes, so pricing is a key issue in terms of universal health coverage. Especially if you're a pharmacist, you can imagine the repeat prescriptions. Just a small difference in 1,000, if you blow it up to the number of prescriptions per day, per week, per month, a small difference goes a long way. That accumulates over time quickly. So the more the prices are minimized, the more that small money or little money you have as a country will spread to more people without exhausting the cover. Then HTA can be used to formulate clinical guidelines because of the robust process using evidence-based techniques. Then we're able to determine. So you look at most, especially the very robust guidelines, they tell you this recommendation is based on class 1A evidence. And so it is strong recommendation. The next one is based on class 2B. So conditional, it's a conditional recommendation. So as a clinician, you're able then to opt for the one that has the strongest evidence to be able to then use for the treatment of patients, which of course will guarantee better outcomes for the patient and for the health system. So remember my example of the antihypertensive drugs. If you did an evaluation of this as under HTA and you realized, oops, 50% of patients are getting first line, 50% are getting second line, 25% are getting second line, and 25% are getting third line, then you're able to make decisions about and train clinicians on how to optimize use of clinical guidelines to optimize care for patients. So guideline development is a key area for HTA. So some countries with notable HTA activity in sub-Saharan Africa, there's a lot of detail on some of these published information. So just sort of a broad overview. South Africa really is leading the pack, is really much more advanced in this area. In fact, some of the universities have quite well developed HTA activities and are even offering technical assistance to some of the current countries around us. So they have established a HTA directorate. They have developed national guidelines for HTA and use HTA to inform inclusion of medicines in the essential medicines list, of course, plus other international collaborations from the West and Europe. Ethiopia has also done quite a bit. Essential Health Services Package, using what we call MCDA, which is a method of HTA, a bit complicated, but quite robust in terms of how it is done. Tanzania, our neighbor, established a HTA committee. They revised their national essential medicines list using HTA SOPs that they developed. So rather than waiting for the WHO to develop essential medicines list, which is what they do every 2 years, they sort of decided, hey, why don't we get this capacity to actually localize the WHO essential medicines list, but now do it in-house. But they also got international collaborations. So HTA right now for us, as in sub-Saharan Africa, is really a lot dependent on those who have gone before us to help us. In Kenya, we've recently, of course, inaugurated the Health Benefits Advisory Panel, even as we head to launching the new revamped social health insurance fund in July. We also have draft HTA guidelines or policies, and we also have worked with international collaborations in Thailand, group, the HTA body, they are called HITAP, to build capacity. Nigeria is also has also done some work in that area. Ghana as well. I'm just looking at the time. I'm seeing I'll just speed up a bit. And Malawi. So quite a cross range of countries from middle income to even the low, what you'd even consider low income, are really doing a tremendous job. So the essential medicines concept, and I know this is probably not taught as much as I probably would think it should be, especially in undergraduate level, for us to understand the essential medicines concept. This was created by WHO in 1977 and really was looking at what are the medicines that can satisfy the priority health needs of the population. So if the priority health needs, again, note the word priority, not all the health needs, priority health conditions. So if the priority health conditions were 5, maybe diarrhea, infectious diseases, you could think of another 4. Those would be the medicines. So it could be even a very short list for a country. But at least we know that once we meet those priority health conditions, really we've taken care of 80% of the issues in that population. And these drugs were selected based on disease prevalence, evidence on efficacy and safety of the medicines, and comparative cost effectiveness. I'll skip that, more or less saying the same thing. So these lists became adopted across countries. So WHO started by developing the first one in 1977, which had only 208 products. And in 2023, released one with 1,200 recommendations, including high-impact medicines in oncology, Hep C, hepatitis C, and diabetes. And there are efforts to increase access through what we call the medicine patent pool, especially for low and middle income countries. The medicine patent pool is really an organization that works between the companies that are innovators and that have patents, and then trying to see if they could allow generic manufacturers to reproduce the same drugs for low and middle income countries. So really just trying to support essential medicines availability. So the availability of essential medicines, and this was a study that was done looking at essential medicines for children, EMC. So they were comparing, has that availability rate improved over the years? And we found in 2009, 2015 was 39% in low and middle income countries, and 43%, slightly increment, maybe 4-5% over that period of time. So not good. Compared to high income countries, which access has about 95%. And again, we say, okay, fine, even that which you are accessing, you have to pay out of pocket. So 50 to 90% of medicines are actually paid out of pocket in low middle income countries. And a study I was reading showed that medicines are the biggest source of out of pocket payments. I think these are alluded to earlier in terms of SDG. So the way forward, really, with all that I've said, is we are really looking at building capacity, and we should consider building capacity. And I'm glad the African Pharmaceutical ideas about building capacity to improve the outcomes or to improve availability or access to medicines. And of course, that will be best if we use existing pharmaceutical data to manage our expenditure and our finances, our pricing, reimbursement decisions are a priority. Of course, using HTA methodology and guidelines where we need to be introduced incrementally along this path. So a lot of collaborations is what we probably will start with because of lack of full technical capacity. Then, of course, as we build technical capacity, and I believe that a lot of that is happening already, then we could begin to do some of these things in-house. I'll use the WHO access framework to sort of take us through what that will look like. So number one is rational selection. Number two is affordable prices. Number three is sustainable financing. Number four is reliable health and supply systems. Without any of these, then access becomes a challenge because you can see how the pieces fit together. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. So removing one leaves a gap and makes it shaky if you're putting that together. So the number one thing is rational selection, and I think we've gone through that. We've said, let's have our national essential medicines list. Let's have our formularies if you're in the private sector or in the NGO sector. Let's have rational use, very important, because what does rational use mean? Because if you don't have rational use, then you're trying to quantify and say, okay, how much of amoxicillin or amoxicillin have we used in the last 1 year so that we can quantify our requirements for the next year? If you're using the wrong drug for the wrong ailment, then your quantification becomes wrong and affects the whole supply chain, affects your costing, and so on and so forth. So HTA can be used to determine the clinical and cost effectiveness, as I said, to determine what goes onto your list, what goes onto your formulary, and which drugs to best use based on clinical guidelines, so therefore affecting rational use, rational selection. I just put there an example of TZ or Tanzania, which developed a transparent SOP for use of HTA to revise their national essential medicines list. So that's where they started. They said, you know what, we can do a lot in HTA because there are very complex things you can do in HTA, very advanced. But we'll start with what we have. We start with revising our national essential medicines list. We'll use HTA, we'll use transparent SOPs, we'll involve stakeholders, we'll train them, and that's what they did. They involved a South African university to do this. So it's up to every country, and not all of us will start at the same level. Some of us will decide something else. But that's the flexibility I love about HTA. It depends on your local context, where you are at, what are the stakeholders. Maybe there's expertise in the university already, so that can help you. You don't have to get somebody else from outside and so on. Then the other thing that we talked about in the jigsaw puzzle is procurement and affordable prices. So one of the things that we need to do is make price information available, openly available, so that we know that amoxicillin is being sold for the same brand for 20 shillings in Uganda, for $20, for $1 in Uganda, for $1 in Kenya, for $2 in South Africa, and so on. So that price information, openly available, helps us to make decisions about how much then should we want to pay for the drugs that we have in our country. And some good work is being done by MSH, Management Sciences for Health. They have their drug price indicator guide that gives you tender prices for tenders that have been, awarded across the globe in low middle income countries, in high income countries, so that you're able to get a feel of, I'm getting price X, but it looks like my price is very high compared to what else is happening around the globe. I know that we have a procurement agency that also publishes outcomes of tenders, so they're able to look at what other organizations are getting in terms of prices for different drugs. So it gives you a feel of how well or how badly you're doing in terms of the outcomes of your tender. Locating new suppliers, very important. You want more suppliers so that you sort of increase the competition. The fewer the suppliers, then the more restricted the pricing. And you can imagine the impact of, as I said, 2 shillings or $1 difference when you multiply it across the number of prescriptions that you're going to serve, accumulates over time. So you really want to eliminate or reduce the amount of money you'll have to pay, considering the limited resources that we have. Then you want to assess the efficiency of local procurement. So some of the things you do that, of course, is through the prices and so on and so forth. HTA can also be used in terms of price negotiations, especially for what we call branded medications. So you're able to do a cost effectiveness. You're able to determine, this drug is very, very cost effective. We don't have any other molecule in the market for it, or whatever we have really is just managing symptoms. So this new drug really is going to cause a major difference in how this disease is managed. And I'm just thinking of a condition like hepatitis C, where a drug called sofosbuvir was created by a company called Gilead. And of course, in the West, it was in the ranges of millions or almost millions. But what a country like Thailand did is they recognized that when they did their HTA, that this was going to cause a major impact in terms of management of the disease. And they were able to negotiate lower prices because they're able to say, look, give us a lower price. We are going to reimburse it within our medical scheme, maybe at $10 or whatever, but at a low price, but it's going to serve a large number of people. And therefore, they were able to get what we call a voluntary license to manufacture, to have that drug manufactured and used it in their health services. So HTA can be used effectively to negotiate for drug prices. Continuing on with procurement and affordable pricing, and these are some of the things, or I may not go through them all, but some of the commonly used ways of managing or reducing or negotiating for better prices as a universal or a national health scheme. You could think about generic substitution for your branded product, which will save you 75 to 95%. You could think of therapeutic competition, so that you create a policy that allows price competition for medicines within the same therapeutic class. So if you have antihypertensives and you have one that's a beta blocker and ones have that an AC inhibitor, then you're able to sort of create a way in which you have an average price or price competition. Internal reference pricing. So again, you have the same therapeutic class. Then you look at how much does a beta blocker cost, how much does an ACE inhibitor cost, and the 3 or 4 other categories. And then you decide, do I take an average of all these drugs, and so on and so forth. External reference pricing, look at different countries in Africa, how much are they buying the drug for, and make a decision about what probably could we use. We have an average of all these reference countries. You could take a reference countries that are within your economic gap. There has to be a rationale for selection of countries, and then you look at how they price their antihypertensives, and you can take an average or a median or the lowest. It can also be used for branded medication, where you could reference countries, especially in the West, they do this a lot. So they're able to look at a group of countries of similar socioeconomic status and decide if this drug is being reimbursed X in Italy, then and in Germany, then me as Canada, I will only pay so much or have it reimbursed within the national health service for so much. Other things you could think about in terms of procurement and affordability that are HTA driven, managed entry agreements. So here is where you say, okay, you know what, this is a new medicine. You've only done a clinical trial for it. Maybe you've only involved 1,000 patients, but you're asking us to reimburse you for every patient $1,000. But we don't know. We are not sure that when it goes out there into the real world, it's going to function as well as it did in your clinical trial, which was more under ideal situations. So what the reimbursement body or the National Health Insurance Fund does is to try and manage the risk, especially for new medicines. It will only reimburse if the outcomes are realized based on your claims. So that's a way of also managing risks and costs. Cost plus pricing. This is evidence shows that even though it's used in some countries, if evidence of effectiveness as a primary policy is not recommended. These are also other ways of handling pricing. How much time do I have so that I know how to manage the few slides left?
About 13, so that we leave the remaining 10 minutes for any questions.
Thank you. So, equitable or tiered pricing is especially for branded medicines. So this could be a drug that is being produced in the US, but you want to sell it to different countries in Africa. So you probably have a different price for South Africa, which is a more developed economy, when you're considering rolling out to. So those are other considerations that we could use HTA to help us in negotiating for lower prices. Value-based pricing is more in the West. And that really looks at the budget impact and affordability. So basically where you have strong pharmaceutical companies and a lobby group, then they say, you know what, our drug is going to produce X value, so you need to pay us more because of the value that we are producing. So that is unlikely to happen here because we may not have original manufacturing or rather patented products. Of course, we pray that that will happen soon, but right now that may not happen may not be happening in Africa. Markup regulation, of course, looking at lower prices, lower markups for drugs with higher prices. I think we're already using that in our institutions. Reducing and eliminating duties or taxes for essential medicines. Local production, very important, and I believe this should really help us in reducing costs of medicines. And some of these, especially for patented medicines, we could look at voluntary licenses under the trades agreements, especially the World Trade Organization agreements and so on. Yeah, so I've just indicated a few legislation that have been enacted in different countries in keeping with trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, which affect the pricing of commodities. If you remember well, the HIV medicines were very expensive, but because of the TRIPS provisions, then licenses from the multinationals were given to South Africa to produce lower cost HIV medicines, and that was a game changer. So we've looked at rational selection, we looked at affordable prices quite a bit there, and let's look at sustainable financing. So when you talk of HTA, we are really looking at two things, technical and allocative efficiency. Now, technical efficiency, if you like to think about it, is if I was given $1,000, two hospitals were given $1,000, and my hospital was able to see and treat comfortably 100 patients, and the other, with the same amount, was able to treat 80 patients. Then you could say that I was more technically efficient in using the resources because we're sort of doing the same service. Allocative efficiency is looking at different services and deciding now which one should we really uphold or promote or fund, because it will give us better outcomes. So this method should be used. I used in HTA to determine where the least resources for maximum health should be. So HTA usually has as one of its components the budget impact analysis for new medicines. So as part of financing, you want to find out, okay, fine, it's cost effective, that's fine, but so on. Donor funding for priority conditions is part of sustainable financing. And then you can see quite a bit of focus on HIV malaria, which is a good HTA. It's a method HTA has been used to determine some of these outcomes. Finally, in terms of the WHO Access Framework, we're looking at reliable health and health supply systems. So we want to ensure that we include partnerships and purchasing schemes to reduce costs. So you have decided, yes, this is the medicine we are going to keep. You've decided this is the price we are going to have it at. The number 3 or number 4 really is looking at how are we going to buy it? What other schemes can we use to reduce costs that will further reduce costs so that the little we have can go to more, can do more. We can buy more drugs for more health facilities. If you could only afford to buy for the referral hospitals and maybe the hospitals just below, then we can spread this to even lower levels and ensure that vaccines are available at primary level care, for example, across the whole chain, and that we don't run out of funds, media, and so on and so forth. So how do we spread? So part of that is really bulk purchasing, things that Global Fund has done very effectively. People like Gavi, and I mentioned the medicine patent pool, pooled procurement, even in Kenya, between institutions. That is happening, and I know that discussion has been going on. Well-funded supply chain system. So we are just not looking at the products, but also the system. It needs to be well-funded. Does it have enough staff to do it? Does it have enough trucks to deliver commodities? So all those are important and need to be factored into an efficient supply chain. Freedom from interference from external parties. Who is winning the tenders? Is it politicians? Are they unduly influencing and getting higher prices? Almost like a somebody just single sourcing, which reduces competition. And that's debt collection on time. So once you sell your products, make sure you get the monies. The supply chain will be more efficient because you're able to buy your products on time and be able to supply institutions with the requirements rather than give them 10-15% of what they ask for. So these supply chain systems need to be reliable. You can imagine if all the good work was done in HTA, the best drug was chosen, The price was right, but when the patient comes to the hospital, they cannot access the drug because the hospital has not paid its bills, or they have not given to the medicine supply agent, who then is not able to buy medicines. So it's, everything just works against each other. So once HTA is used to decide on which medicine to include, then the other thing is you also need to ensure that the medicine is registered in country. Otherwise, then you have a gap there. So there's no point of going all the way, have the HTA registered, and then the medicine is not. So it needs to be locally available. That's very important. Then now we can look at, in the public sector, we can use, you can look at demand. What would be the expected demand for this based on disease burden, past consumption, or similar facilities or country, so that you quantify, what we call quantification. Then you create a detailed forecast of what you require at what time, then do supply planning, what will be the total amounts required, what will be the total cost, put that in a budget, have it approved, and then once that is done, then you can advertise for tenders and bids. And then once they are, people respond to those bids or tenders, then that needs to be done transparently. And then once they start, and then they're contracted in proper contracting, whether they're given framework contracts that allow different bidders to supply the same product in the event that one goes out of stock, those kind of things. And then, of course, evaluate supplier performance, very important. Timely payment of suppliers, as I've talked about. Private sector, NGO procurement, you could talk of negotiated contracts. So here again, you can use HTA data to negotiate contracts for competitive pricing. And then consortium purchases, where hospitals and clinics may form purchasing consortia. Again, what we call bulk purchasing, to improve on collective bargaining power. Other purchasing considerations, like what the donors use, because we're in a donor-driven, donor, not as much maybe compared to the lower income countries, but we still have donor support. So you could think of advanced market commitment, and these are made at large global level, where before they produce the pneumococcal vaccine, they sort of got a feel of and brought in participating countries which committed themselves, and they were able to go to the manufacturer and say, look, produce the drug, we have a market. So that helped them get lower prices for that. So again, those are techniques that we could use to reduce costs. Of course, public-private partnerships are very important, so that we are not saying government and private are separate. They could actually come together and do some good work in terms of affordability of medicines. Other considerations that you may want to think about, even as we talk of universal health coverage, and as you do your tendering and negotiations, after you've decided the molecule is good, you shouldn't fail at product quality when you're doing your tendering. There are many things you could look at. You shouldn't fail at considering availability. Is it registered? Is it locally available? Is the supplier reliable? And so on and so forth. Strategic purchasing. Here we use HTA to ensure continual good outcomes. So like now we have the national, the Social Health Insurance Fund is doing what we call strategic purchasing. It is contracting with service providers, but it is going to contract based on performance. That is a form of strategic purchasing. So under this kind of agreement, they could reimburse only with proof of outcomes, or they could add you money if you maybe did much better than they had thought. So again, ways of improving performance, quality, which needs to be part of HTA, not just bringing things in or getting things in place, but just tracking for quality, so that HTA now is able to monitor and ensure that quality is maintained throughout. So finally is the monitoring and the evaluation aspect of HTA for our health systems, for drugs and medical devices throughout the life cycle that I mentioned. So we never stop HTA once a drug comes in or a medical device. It's through the life cycle. There is a branch of HTA that is called disinvestment, where you now say we come to a point where we realize it's no longer cost effective. 10 years ago, it was cost effective, but things have changed. Now we are disinvesting. We are no longer reimbursing for this because new technology has come, cheaper technology has come, and so on and so forth. So the supply chain should also go through the same evaluation and monitoring using HTA techniques. You could think of lead times for procurement, cost per unit of medicines. All these are things you could track to help you under HTA to determine whether your supply chain system is optimized. With that, I would like to end my presentation and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Doc, for that impactful and very informative presentation. I will now open the floor to questions. Anyone who has any questions, please raise your hand and we'll be able to unmute you to pose it. But if you cannot, please feel free to use the question and answer or the chat section. Meanwhile, I have one question. You did mention something on pay for performance, which is results-based financing using quality indicators. And my question here is, what metrics and indicators are used to evaluate the impact of these technologies to post-implementation?
You could decide, there could be anything, but what is, let's think of a clinic, for example, or a hospital. Revisits could be one. So number of patients who do revisits, and revisits could be because the treatment, the diagnosis was missed, or the treatment was suboptimal, or the compliance or adherence was not right. So that could be a good indicator for a health facility. You could also think of number of deaths for inpatients, especially if it's not ICU. ICU tends to be a bit tricky, but number of deaths could be. So of course you compare that with other facilities to see whether they are, similar disease patterns, for example, or similar level, like a level 6, which is more referral. So those are some things so that you find whether they're outliers, whether these people, are they managing patients, so those are some of the indicators that you could use. Of course, other indicators could be process indicators, where you are looking at your efficiencies of the system. How long does it take for patients when they come to the accident and emergency to be admitted to the ward? Those are some of the process indicators, and those affect outcomes of care, or how long does it take to get attended once you enter the A&E, for example, because of life and death situations. So those kind of things.
All right, thank you. Just to clarify, every metric that you're giving is more on the hospital level. So does that mean, because I understand there's also HTA at regional and national level. So does that mean that the metrics and indicators to determine the effectiveness of these technologies is only possible at hospital level?
No. So you could have HTA at many levels. You could have it at a hospital level. You could have it at a regional level. You could have it at a national level. So it is just, it is you to determine your catchment area, because once you determine your catchment area, then you're looking at the costs and the outcomes in that catchment area. So, for example, what we are doing what we would, ideally do under the Social Health Insurance Fund would be at a national level.
Okay.
So maybe we look at different hospitals across the country and look at their death rates for similar institutions, or look at their time from admission from coming to the hospital to admissions across the hospital, and then look at how much they charge and so on and so forth. So so then we're able to look at the and how much does the service costs, and so you'll be looking at local data. That's one. But you could so there's something called hospital HTA, where you could, it's more localized. You can think of, I want to buy an MRI machine. Should I buy an MRI machine, or should I buy or should I expand and do another theater, for example? So you look at the costs and the benefits of those two. Now, the scope of a HTA can be at different levels. Could have scope of HTA at individual level, or what we call perspectives. The perspective, what perspective are you taking on? And that determines what costs and what outputs to consider. So if you're looking at it from a hospital or provider perspective, then you'll only consider costs and outcomes that affect the provider. If you're looking at it from a society, what you call a society perspective, then you'll be looking at what costs society incurs and what benefits society will accrue from that assessment.
Okay. Yeah, that was clear. Thank you so much. I think maybe one last question in case anyone has a question. I'm not seeing any in the chat, so maybe I can just pose mine. Are there any challenges to the adoption of HTA in Africa, and how can we make this a mainstay practice?
Yes, there are quite a number of challenges, and thanks for the question. I think one is technical expertise. We don't have the technical expertise to do this to a large extent, really. In some countries are better than others. So some countries, like my country, the capacity really has been very strong in the research, the government research institutions like KEMRI, or Kenya Medical Research Institute. So really they're the movers and shakers of HTA on our side. If you go to another country, you may find it's the universities that are stronger. And so whatever it is that is strongest, that's the place that you can start off. Of course, the other thing is the political will. Do we have the political will? Would we be willing to subject ourselves to a transparent, explicit process in terms of deciding what should be done? The other thing is what we call capacity building or lack of awareness. Maybe I put them together. So yeah, so it's possible there could be a desire, let's say at even a hospital level, but you're not aware there's such a thing exists to do this. Of course, financial resources. Do we have the financial resources to create HTA? It also costs. You have to get the experts. You have to train them. If you need to, send them for university courses. And then finally you have to employ them, and then they have to do their own evaluation. You have to create these committees. You have to create another unit in the Ministry of Health for HTA, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so I think those would be the ones that come quickly to mind.
Oh, thank you so much. Are there any questions? There's someone in the chat who is saying, I find that what you mentioned for HTA is what medicines and therapeutic committees do. Can HTA be mapped to medicines and therapeutic committees?
Definitely. In fact, you could be talking of a local or hospital or institutional medicine therapeutics committee, but there's also the national one. So you can adopt whatever it is that is being done at national level to, just like I mentioned what Tanzania did. They build capacity, especially in terms of health economics, doing what you call economic evaluations. How do you do a cost effectiveness or a cost utility analysis to determine between two medicines, which one to best use in your, or best adapt. So that expertise is not readily or necessarily available in an institution, for example, a hospital. I don't think many hospitals, for example, employ health economists just to do that. So yeah, so, but yes, to answer your questions, yes, it should be, and it can be used.
Right. Thank you, Rose. I believe he's answered your question. Are there any other questions before we wrap this up? Okay, if there are no other questions, I see we are also out of time. So I just wanted to thank you, all the participants that have taken time from their busy schedules to be here. And a special thank you to our speaker, Dr. Kamau. Thank you so much. I have definitely learned a lot. And I look forward to future collaborations within the HTA space. It looks like a very interesting field. And with that,
Thank you.
And with that, I wish everyone a lovely evening. You may now exit.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Azar.